asking a question. If you could please mute your mic, that would be very helpful. All right, wonderful. Okay, and once again, welcome everybody to the learning session today, which is entitled Welcoming New Americans to Your Workplace Hiring 101. I'm Marie Larson with the City of Minneapolis, and I'm going to turn this session over right away to our speaker who will be queuing up our welcome, and he is Assistant Commissioner Mohammed, who is here from DEED, and he is the Assistant Commissioner of Immigrant and Refugee Services or Affairs. Is this correct? Am I using the right word? Okay. Abdi Wahab Mohammed, thank you so much for being here. And I will turn the floor over to you for a welcome.
Hello, everyone. My name is Abdi Wahab Mohammed. I have the honor of opening up this session. It's the first I've attended so far since I took over from my predecessor, Anissa. You may have worked with her. Um, I appreciate all the work that the panelists are doing, the speakers are doing, and for you all coming here today. I'll just do a little bit of what I do and maybe start off what we all agree. My name is Abdullah Mohammed. I'm the Assistant Commissioner over at DEED. We have an office called the Office of New Americans, also the Immigrant and Refugee Affairs. This office is basically there to coordinate the state's efforts to integrate immigrants into the workforce or into our economy. So you will have Department of Health, Department of Education, Public Safety, all doing their work. This office is there within the state to coordinate all that effort and to work with the city of Minneapolis, city of St. Paul, and all the other cities who have such efforts. We also placed within DEED. That means we could tap into the workforce areas like here. And thank you for hosting us today. I know we will also acknowledge Dr. Ibrahim, who's been here for a while as well. And thank you all for making this your home. This is the place to start your search or help integrating immigrants into the economy. The second thing I'll talk about is what we all agree here is that when you talk about immigration, we all agree that the body of immigration work that we have, the INA, the Immigration and Nationality Act, has always been there, has been there for close to 40 years and has not been repealed or changed. So, everyone talks about how that needs to be, more work needs to be done and overhaul our immigration system, but I'll let the experts talk about that. But we all agree that that is something that needs to be discussed so that businesses and of course the states can make sure that we welcome immigrants into our communities. That's one. Second thing we all agree is that immigrants and refugees contribute to our economy, create jobs, and fill the jobs that are there. They're all entrepreneurs. They're also people who are coming here to work, and the labor force participation rate is higher than some of the communities that have been here historically. So that is to say that we need to do more work to remove the barriers that we have that have been locking out some of the immigrants into joining the workforce. So that's some of the work that we all do, and that's where we're here today. So with those few remarks, I'll turn it over back to you and let the experts talk about that. But we're here as a resource. Please let me know. I'll stay until the end of the session, but I might jump out and come back. I'll be here to answer any questions. Thank you.
Can hear. Thank you so much, Assistant Commissioner. We really appreciate you being here with us today and the incredible work really and support coming from the Department of Employment and Economic Development. We are gonna, I think, just go ahead and move right into our slide presentation and our presenters here today. So I am going to go ahead and just pull this slide back up and screen share that, and then we will move forward. Okay.
But first your phone.
Here we go. I think we're back up and running. Okay. So to go over just a little bit here, what we're going to be covering today's agenda, we just had our welcome. Our program includes the business case for immigrant inclusion in the workplace. We're going to be talking about immigration classification, an overview for employers, some classifications which require employer sponsorship, classifications requiring employer and that do require employer sponsorship, nuts and bolts, obtaining legal counsel and collaboration opportunities. We're going to have some real world examples. Excited to welcome Silas Mayberry, who is the Vice President of Human Resources at Home Depot, a Q&A, and then we'll be going to talking further about the upcoming Employer Roundtable on March 8th. So I'm going to now talk about today's presenters. We are joined by Marissa Hill Dongre, Dongre, Assistant Director of International Health, Safety, and Compliance, Global Programs and Strategy Alliance at the University of Minnesota. Michelle Rivera, who's the Director of Office of Immigrant and Refugee Affairs at the City of Minneapolis. And again, Silas Mayberry, who is here with Home Depot representing the Upper Midwest. Okay, so I'm going to now turn this over to Michelle and Marissa to take it from here. And just let me know if you would like for me to move a slide. How does that sound? All right, thank you.
So I think we wanted to start with a little bit more background about what Marissa and I do to give you a little bit of context into our work before we start this presentation. So I'm in the Office of Immigrant and Refugee Affairs for the city. This office was established in 2018 and is really focused on welcoming new arrivals and welcoming individuals who may have been here for years, who are new Americans, individuals who have been immigrant and refugee backgrounds, and connecting people to services and opportunities so to achieve lives of safety, dignity, and opportunity for immigrants. Some of our objectives include to increase naturalization and acquisition of secure immigration status by facilitating connections to legal service providers, and also to develop opportunities to learn about and celebrate immigrant and refugee residents and culture here in the city. So it's a quickie overview, and I'll turn it over to Marissa to introduce yourself.
Okay, thanks, Michelle. Like Marie said, my name is Marissa Hill Dongre. I work at the University of Minnesota, and I work in the university's Global Programs and Strategy Alliance, which is the office at the university that that works on internationalization, works with international students and scholars, and also with learning abroad and sort of all things international at the university. I, in my capacity at the University of Minnesota, run the university's immigration response team, which helps the university understand sort of how immigration laws and policies impact members of the University of Minnesota community. And I also support those members of the community where immigration status and rules sort of run up against all of the other things that are happening at the university and help try to sort of smooth the road there. I worked for a number of years in the university's International Student and Scholar Services office with students and working a lot on the immigration status of international faculty at the university. And prior to working at the university, I practiced immigration law at nonprofit in the Twin Cities. So Michelle and I are happy to sort of be doing similar work in different settings and to be able to collaborate on today's presentation. I'll hand it back to you.
Yeah. Super. So I'm just going to give a little context with regard to new American inclusion in the workplace and why now is an excellent moment for employers to be engaged in and learning about hiring new Americans. But first, a little bit of context on what we mean when we talk about new Americans. New Americans is a general term that we use to describe individuals who are aspiring to or who may be able to acquire U.S. citizenship at some point in the future. It's a broader description than immigrants and refugees and is a more welcoming term than foreign workers or foreign talent. So as we use this expression throughout this presentation, I want to make sure that you know what we're talking about. With regard to hiring new Americans now, As many of us know, Minnesota is now experiencing a record low unemployment rate. There are tens of thousands of jobs, if not more, that are currently unfilled. Hiring new American workers also fosters long-term relationships and goodwill with cultural communities that are growing in the state of Minnesota. In the city of Minneapolis alone, we have over 63,000 individuals who are born outside of the United States, composing 1/6 of the population of the city, and this number is growing. Also, newcomer populations offer unique and important business insights and trends. If you are, as an employer, trying to engage with new arrival communities or individuals who are from different cultural backgrounds, ensuring that you have a cultural workforce that is representative of the actual population of the city and state is valuable. And I wanted to share also that if you are interested in pursuing this journey, that some of the work is already done for you. There are a number of immigrant and refugee inclusion strategies that are contained within a report that was issued last year called The Journey to Belonging in the Twin Cities. This report was a partnership between Minneapolis Regional Chamber, the City of St. Paul, the City of Minneapolis, and the St. Paul Chamber to develop, and you can move to the next slide. Thank you. A number of goals and strategies fostering new American inclusion in the Twin Cities area. One focal area, and you can move to the next slide again, thank you, Mary, is economic and workforce development. And there are a number of goals and strategies that were arrived at by a group of stakeholders, multi-sectoral stakeholders working in a variety of different areas, supporting immigrant and refugee inclusion. So this slide and the report itself identifies a number of objectives and ways in which employers can include new Americans in the workplace and strategies by which to do so. Next slide, please.
Okay, so I get to sort of teach the immigration law lesson of the presentation today. And I'll try to be as painless as possible. But as Assistant Commissioner Mohammed mentioned, we have a complicated set of immigration laws. And what we hope to do today is not, force you into being immigration law experts, but maybe to demystify the structure of the laws a little bit and to help people understand that there are opportunities for hiring lots of people who are here, who have work authorization and who are eager to work in positions that we have here. If you could go to the next slide, please. So for people who work in HR, you might be familiar with this, or if you've recently gotten a new job, you might remember yourself going through the I-9 process. We're putting this up as an example of the fact, to demonstrate that people who are not immigration law experts come into contact with immigration laws in a lot of different ways. And one common way is through hiring, through having to go through this I-9 process when individuals are hired. And so it's the I-9 process is a really common place where immigration status will come up right away in hiring new Americans into the workforce. If you could go to the next slide. The next slide is more of that I-9 paperwork. It's the list of documents that individuals can show in order to show that they have work authorization in the US. And people who work with I-9s regularly will be familiar with reviewing the most common types of documents that people might show. So that would be, the citizenship documents, a US passport or a green card, a lawful permanent resident card. And the categories of people that we're going to be going into more detail about today are people who have less familiar documents maybe, but still these Schedule A or List A documents that show both identity and work authorization in the US. And I think it's a valuable time to be talking about some of those less common types of documents, because I think we'll be seeing more people and it's sort of an expansion of people who are showing things like an EAD card or employment authorization document, or an I-94, which is an immigration sort of entry to the US record in combination with other documents to show work authorization. So we could go to the next slide. I'm going to start by sort of laying the groundwork without going into too much detail about how the US immigration system works. And it's much more complicated than just, are you not from here or are you a citizen? There are dozens of categories in between. And we're going to try to get into some of those other categories today. It's important to know that when we're talking about new Americans, when we're talking about people who are not US citizens, there are two sort of main routes or main pathways for immigration status in the US. There are temporary visas and there are permanent visas, or non-immigrant versus immigrant visas. And the main immigration pathways are really determined through a variety of different sort of patchwork systems in immigration law, but they break down into some common categories: employment, family, humanitarian, the diversity lottery, and educational pathways. And within those, there are non-immigrant and immigrant visa types. And so for the purposes of this presentation, it's important to know that work authorization can be the main point of an immigration status with, for example, an H-1B visa, which is an employer-sponsored work visa. The whole point of that visa status is work authorization in the US. But work authorization can also just be sort of a side benefit or a resulting benefit of an immigration status or an application that someone has submitted. There are lots of examples of this. One common one would be an asylum application. At a certain point in the asylum application process, a person can become eligible for work authorization. So the work authorization isn't the point of the visa status, but it's a side benefit of it. It's also quite common that people will be here in the US and change from one immigration status to another. So they might switch from one temporary visa status to another kind of temporary visa status. A common example of that could be someone on a student visa who changes status to a work visa. Or they could adjust status from a temporary visa status to a permanent visa status, like an immigrant visa or a green card. And it's quite a common thought amongst employers or amongst people who haven't had a lot of interaction with the immigration system that in order to hire someone who's a new American, who's not a citizen of the US, you're going to have to sponsor them for a visa in order for them to be able to work for you. That's sometimes the case, but it's not always the case. And so I'm hoping to cover some information to fill in the lines a little bit. Next slide, please. Okay, so there are a number of classifications of visa statuses that don't require employer sponsorship. On the slide right here are a list of many of them. We're not going to go into detail about all of them. If there are questions about some of these statuses, we'd be happy to take them later. But this is a list just to provide an example of these are groups of people who are here in the US, in Minnesota, who many of whom most of the people on this list will have work authorization already and who don't need employer sponsorship. If you hired them for a position, they would be able to show you their EAD card or their other immigration documents to show that they're already authorized to work in the US. That's okay. It's okay to be here. So over the next few slides, what I'm going to do is go into more detail about some of the statuses that were on that previous slide, especially ones that we feel are in the news a lot, becoming more common, where we might see growing populations of people with these statuses. And they're really good to know about if you're looking at hiring in a tight job market. So one of those is temporary protected status, or TPS. I don't know that I know another, I'm sure they exist, but I don't know that I know another profession that loves acronyms as much as immigration lawyers. So I'll try to intersperse the acronym with the actual name for it. But temporary protected status is a program that's been around for a long time. It's authorized by the federal government. And it's something that's issued for people who are citizens of a country where there's some kind of a crisis. It could be a natural disaster, it could be a civil war, but it's designated for people who are citizens of that country, who are already in the US at the time that crisis happens. And so it's temporary protection. It's a status for people who are from that country. So it is I think we don't want to get into the political side of immigration, but it's something that if you've been following immigration in the news over the last 6 or 7 years at all, you'll have heard TPS heard of TPS because the previous administration wanted to try to get rid of TPS almost entirely. This administration is embracing TPS as a way to provide temporary authorization to people from lots of different countries, and we've seen an expansion. So it's something that changes depending on the administration. And you can see a list of who's currently eligible. The countries are listed on the screen. I think there is not currently TPS for Turkey, but I think what we've seen happen in Turkey and northern Syria over the past couple of weeks is exactly the type of thing that would cause a country to be designated for temporary protected status. I wouldn't be surprised at all if in the next couple of months, Turkey, or maybe even weeks, I don't know, if Turkey gets designated for temporary protected status. And it wouldn't mean that people from Turkey could come here to get temporary protected status. It would mean if you were here on a tourist visa, and you're a Turkish citizen, when the earthquake happened, you could be eligible to stay for a temporary period of time. Or if you were here on a student visa or a work visa, it's for people who are already here. And it's typically designated for months at a time and then is reviewed to see whether conditions have recovered sufficiently to end the designation or whether it should be continued. People who apply for it and who are granted TPS have work authorization for the time that they have TPS. And that work authorization can be used to work anywhere in the country, in any field. The employer doesn't have to sort of take any action on behalf of the person with TPS. Okay, we can go to the next slide. The next slide is humanitarian parole. And this has some similarities to TPS in that it recognizes a humanitarian issue happening in the world, but it's different in a lot of ways. One other similarity is that it's not a new program or a new mechanism in immigration law. It's existed for a long time. Humanitarian parole was, if I'm not, correct me if I'm mistaken, but humanitarian parole, I think, was the mechanism that was used to bring a lot of people here at the end of the Vietnam War. And it's the same mechanism that was used about 1.5 years ago to quickly bring a lot of Afghans to the US. So it's a mechanism, again, that can be, it's not designated in as formal of a way as TPS is, but it's a way to quickly bring people to the US when they're experiencing instability in their country of citizenship. And it can be for people from anywhere in the world. It can be applied for on a sort of individual basis. But what we're seeing right now is that there are certain populations or parole pathways that have been created in recognition of things that are going around the world. So there's currently a specific pathway that many Afghans have used to arrive to the US. Uniting for Ukraine is another example of a parole pathway for Ukrainians. And even more recently than that, there's a new parole program that was created for Venezuelans, Haitians, Nicaraguans, and Cubans. And so these are specific programs that have a lot of really clearly delineated criteria on government websites. Parole basically is the legal terminology for how a person gets into the US. People who are paroled into the US have permission to be here for a specific period of time and have work authorization for that period of time that they're here, and parole can be renewable. Let's see if we can go to the next slide. I'm just sort of looking at the notes of things I wanted to make sure I covered. I think we can go to the next slide. Okay. So changing course a little bit from two common humanitarian population, the humanitarian visa populations, I wanted to talk a little bit about the F1 students. So F1 is a temporary visa used mostly for, or used entirely for international students who are studying in the US. F1 visa holders, almost 100% of the time are people here, not on a short-term exchange program, but are people who are here doing a degree program in the US. And they're, it's a highly regulated visa status. There's a lot of interaction between the student, the institution where they study, and the federal government, all playing a role in maintaining the student's visa status. There is some work authorization allowed for students in F1 status. there's not an employer role in sponsoring F1 students for work while they're in F1 status. If we go to the next slide, there's just a little bit of information about the different kinds of employment that are open to people in F1 visa status. They're allowed to work a certain number of hours a week on campus. That won't be of interest to most independent employers, but CPT or curricular practical training is a way for F1 students to basically do internships or work during the time that they're in their academic program. And OPT or optional practical training is a period of work authorization that F1 students have after they complete their program. There are some rules around this. It's not as flexible as, say, someone who has TPS and has an employment authorization document and can work anywhere, can work you know, in a variety of locations. An F1 student has to work in a job that's related to their field of study. But there are a lot of good connections, and we do see a lot of local employers who are saying, you know, we need people who've just graduated with a bachelor's degree in engineering, or we need people who've just graduated with a bachelor's degree in chemistry, or whatever it might be. And these students are able to apply for the work authorization on their own and bring it to the employer and work for a specific period of time. And oftentimes that's a good sort of trial period for an employer to get to know an employee and make a decision about whether they might be interested in sponsoring them for a longer term work authorization. Okay, so, and then moving through these, well, maybe it feels slow if it's a boring amount of detail, or maybe it feels fast if it's not enough detail, but I'm sort of trying to move through and give us a flavor, hoping that at the end we'll have questions if people have heard of these or want a little bit more detail. Switching tactics a little bit. So all of those previous visa statuses were people who have work authorization that don't need employer sponsorship. I wanted to talk in a little bit of detail about one really common classification that does require employer sponsorship, which is the H-1B visa. This is not the only type of employer-sponsored visa. It is one of the most common, but there are others. And one that I think is overlooked quite a bit that we should be paying attention to is the TN visa, which is for citizens of Mexico and Canada. Being so close to Canada, we do see a number of people who are here in the US on TN visas. And we also see a lot of Mexican citizens who are using their background in education to get TN visas. Those are sort of because of treaties that the US and Mexico and Canada are all parties to. But I thought we would go into detail a little bit about the H-1B visa. So this is specifically for people who have at least a bachelor's degree in a specialty occupation and have a job offer that requires a degree in that specialty occupation. The bachelor's degree doesn't need to be from the US. It can be from other countries around the world. But they have to have that training and background, and the employer sponsors them, which means that they can only work for that specific employer. It can be granted for up to 3 years at a time, though it can be renewed for 6 years total. And when I say a bachelor's degree in a specialty occupation, in a job that requires that field, I'll use myself as an example. I graduated many years ago with a bachelor's degree in sociology. There are very few jobs that require a bachelor's degree in sociology. I would have had a hard time getting an H-1B visa because I had sort of a general degree and I was looking for sort of general jobs. So if you're looking for someone who you're requiring a bachelor's degree, but that bachelor's degree can be in anything, that job is not a good fit for an H-1B visa. But if you have a job that requires a bachelor's degree in a specific field, that could be a good fit for sponsorship for an H-1B visa. We could go to the next slide, please. And then one more thing that I wanted to talk about, talking about sort of this journey from shorter term status to longer term status. It also is possible for an employer to sponsor an employee for permanent status, for a green card or lawful permanent residence. And this is a long path. There are multiple different routes to get there, and it's complicated. You'd end up working with an immigration lawyer who would help you through this process. But it is possible to sponsor non-immigrants or new Americans for a green card based on their employment in the US. And we've included quite a few links in the presentation and in a resource sheet at the end. I'm sure it'll be circulated to everyone who signed up afterwards if you wanted to go and look in more detail. So that was sort of a lot of different options. It did actually, I skipped a lot of things. We could have talked about, you know, a lot more sort of subcategories, but just to give a flavor of how many employable people in a variety of different statuses are here in the US. And I think before I hand it back to Michelle, I'll just say that it can be hard to know when to have conversations about a person's work authorization, about their visa status. It is complicated, both from the employer and the prospective employee perspective, to know when to have those conversations. But what I'm hoping people will do is have a little bit more of an open mind toward the possibility of hiring people that may have a little bit more of a complicated situation or might not have the typical documents that make the I-9 process a breeze, because it's often less work on the part of the employer than one might assume.
Is this a good stop out point for questions, or do you want to go to the next?
I think we're good on time, so if people want to take a little breather, if people have questions, I know they'll
Yeah.
put them in the chat.
There's a lot happening there. So I know we've got several in the room already. So I am gonna swap over my view here and just welcome you all to call in folks in the room if you'd like.
I saw a hand right here.
Mhm.
With the TPS and the humanitarian flow, is there no kind of documentation comes with those?
Good question. So for TPS, the person will have an employment authorization document or an EAD card, and it will list the period of time for which they're authorized to work. And the person won't know at that point whether TPS is going to be renewed or redesignated. After that, there's a lot of examples of TPS being redesignated. And so oftentimes there's a good chance that it will be extended beyond that. But when they come in and you're going through the I-9 process or doing the hire, it'll just be an EAD card that has that, end date. It'll be valid for a year and a half or 2 years usually. It can get a little bit complicated when TPS is redesignated, because sometimes the federal government waits until the very last minute to put all of the pieces together and do the redesignation. So there's some examples right now where people have an EAD card that's expired, and then there's a notice on the US Citizenship and Immigration Services website that says TPS has been redesignated for this country until X date. So they may be showing you like a government website that says if they're a citizen of Haiti and their EAD expires on February 3rd, it's automatically extended for a year beyond that or something like that. So EAD and government website. Through some of the humanitarian parole pathways, we're seeing people who have their I-94 record, which is their record of entry into the US, that is temporary proof of work authorization because the government is taking a long time to issue those EAD cards. So it might be an I-94 record plus their passports, so showing identity and which program they've been admitted in. Sure.
There's another one here. Yep.
So I work in tech and I work with a lot of software engineers
Mm-hmm.
who traditionally, like several would have come in on H-1B visas and been supported.
Yep.
Over the past several years, I've also been doing a lot of work to try to open doors to software engineering to folks who don't have bachelor degrees, 2-year degrees, boot camp, self-taught.
Yeah.
At what point does that affect the ability for H-1B visas to come in as software engineers?
So you've hit on a very hot topic in sort of hiring and immigration law. Because the immigration laws are as old as they are, we see that there are a lot of places where the professions that are out there or the requirements for degrees don't really match the reality of what hiring looks like right now. So that's a place where where Congress needs to catch up, where we need changes to the laws. In terms of, is your question about how does that impact the hiring of specific individuals, or how does hiring people with different qualifications impact the ability to hire others in H-1B status?
The
latter. Okay, that's what I thought. So, that's really tricky. That's probably not an easy question for me to answer right now, but so that other people know what the issue is. Sometimes an employer can show that they require a degree in a specialty occupation if they show that everyone they've hired has degrees at a certain level or in certain fields. And so you maybe weaken your ability to do that a little bit if you've hired people who have a combination of like an associate's degree and experience, then it's showing you don't always actually require a bachelor's degree. So it can make it harder to get the federal government to grant you an H-1B visa for a certain individual you're hiring. There are immigration lawyers that really specialize in that intersection, and I could probably, give you some websites and some references and things to think about. But there is, I would just acknowledge that there's a tension between what immigration laws require in order to slot people into these really narrow categories that exist, and a lot of other efforts that are going on to diversify the workforce and to acknowledge other types of preparation and training. So I don't have a good answer for you. Sorry.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we have a question here on Teams to repeat the question, so just so you know, I'll be.
Oh, and I can try
repeating.
to do that.
Sure. We have another question over here. Go ahead.
Please let me know if my question is too specific to individual. So I work on a temporary grant with DHS, and my question is next. Do we have a clear requirement who can submit the H-1B application? For example, you working for 10 positions temporary for 2 years. Am I eligible to apply with them for H-1B visa? Who is the person who's in charge of that application? Is it organization, government? Other requirements? I'm trying to understand other chances with my work, or I have to find a different job.
Sure. Well, I think I can answer the general parts of that. So the question was, who can H-1B visas be filed for positions that have temporary funding, if it's like through a grant? And who is the sponsor if the funding is through a federal grant, but the work is being done somewhere else? I'm just restating the question for
Correct.
people who are online. So I can give you some general information about that. It's not a problem at all to file an H-1B visa for a temporary position. They're temporary employment visas. They can be filed for a period of 3 years at a time, up to 3 years at a time. They can also be filed for a shorter period of time. So if, for example, an employer knows that they only have 2 years of grant funding, an H-1B visa could be filed for a 2-year period without any problem. And then say more grant funding comes through and there are 2 more years, they could do an extension for 2 more years. So the temporary factor there isn't a problem. In terms of who the employer is, the employer is going to be the person who's paying the salary, who's supervising the work. The grant funding probably isn't going to be problematic for that, though. There are some parts of that process that are about who can pay and or showing that you have the ability to pay and figuring out what that supervision looks like. There's a lot of information online about the H-1B visa process, and that's probably a good place to start figuring this out, because H-1B visas are complicated. Depending on the type of employer, there are also caps to the number of H-1B visas that are available every year. And if the job is in this types of field that are subject to this cap, then they're on a specific timeline. So I think actually I don't always recommend the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services website. Sometimes it's good and sometimes it's not so good, but there is a lot of information about the H-1B process there, and that can be a good place to start.
It depends when you end employment with a specific organization.
Right. So when does an H-1B visa end? So let's say that that the person is sponsored for 3 years for an H-1B visa, and that's granted. And then after 1.5 years, the person either wants to leave that position, or let's say the funding changes and there's no longer funding for that position to continue. There is a grace period after the end of the H-1B visa, and the person could apply, try to move to a different H-1B employer. But there are a lot of factors that need to be figured out in terms of the timing to be able to do that. Right, or they could transition to another status. Sometimes we see people do an H-1B job and then decide that when that's ending, that's a good time to get an advanced degree if they don't have an advanced degree in the field that they're working in. Or sometimes they switch to a different kind of work visa. When I talked at the beginning about there being employment-based immigration and humanitarian and family, those are the different routes, but people often switch between them, and life happens while people are here living their lives and working. And so we see people sometimes who are moving between those different pathways as different opportunities come up.
I see one more question in the chat. What do you do when a job requires 5 years of US citizenship?
Sure. Well, I have to say that I personally haven't seen a job posting that requires a certain amount of time with US citizenship. So I don't know if I'll be answering the question correctly because that's not a requirement that I've seen. I do know, and that I actually see this quite a bit at the university, that there's research funding that comes to the university from the federal government that may require US permanent residence or US citizenship. So lots of government funding may have immigration status requirements on it. And if that's the case, there's really no way around it. But one thing I will say that I have seen is that employers often want to make sure that they're not running afoul of immigration laws when they're posting positions, when they're doing hiring, and will sometimes borrow or adopt language around immigration status that they know has sort of past requirements in the past and might not actually be a requirement for that specific job or position. I think some of what Michelle and I are trying to do in our work is to get people thinking about if there are immigration status requirements around a job, is there a job related requirement that those be there, or is there an opportunity to reconsider those requirements?
Excellent question. Yeah, absolutely.
I
So
think that's enough me. I should hand it to Michelle.
I think we can transition to what is the last part of this presentation, because we did want to make sure that there was enough time for questions and also have Silas here speaking. So we'll just wrap it up quickly. On the topic of obtaining legal counsel and collaboration opportunities, as we've gone through in this presentation, really tried to give a high level overview, and also want to stress that if you are considering employing someone or who needs sponsorship, who requires sponsorship, the value of consulting with an immigration attorney. That said, there are many entities that are working with new American communities that can be a source of additional information, including when people don't require sponsorship. Example organizations include the refugee resettlement organizations, including International Institute of Minnesota, Minnesota Council of Churches, and others. Community-based organizations such as Afghan Cultural Society, Ukrainian American Community Center, and more, and other organizations that work to connect employees, prospective employees, with employers. Some examples include Prosperity Ready and more, and CAPI. In addition to these different organizations, there are municipal, county, and state level entities like the ones represented here on this table, who also work to help remove barriers to employment within new American communities and have an objective to connect new arrival or new American community members with employment opportunities. There are additional initiatives that are popping up all the time. It's seemingly every day regarding welcoming of new arrival communities, and one organization that may be of interest is Welcome US. So legal service providers, we are very lucky here in Minnesota that we have nationally recognized immigration legal service providers and attorneys here in Minnesota. Many immigration attorneys have expertise in employment-based immigration matters. One resource to identify immigration counsel is the American Immigration Lawyers Association, Minnesota Dakota's chapter. And I know that some employers also have in-house counsel or contract with immigration legal service providers. And I'm not sure whether any sort of collaboration exists at this point, but if there are larger employers that have an in-house counsel that may be interested in connecting with individuals who are just kind of dipping their toes into hiring new American workers, that would be something that I know Melissa and I would be really interested in connecting with people to discuss further. Next slide, please.
Okay. All right, we are on to our next amazing presenter. We welcome Silas Mayberry here at the end of the table to today's event. Thanks for being here, Silas. He's the Director of Human Resources for the Upper Midwest locations of the Home Depot. He's been with the company in various capacities for 10 years and has responsibility for supporting stores with staffing, engagement, employee relations, and talent planning for leadership roles. Prior to his time at Home Depot, he practiced labor and employment law with a small firm in the Twin Cities, and Silas lives in St. Paul and is married to an amazing wife. They have a 6-year-old son, a 4-year-old daughter, and Silas happily spends most of his time chasing them around while squeezing in cross-country skiing wherever there is time. And I hear there will be snow. Snow.
Yeah, that's the rumor. Feeling good about that. Those were my words in case my wife for some reason ever hears this. I called her an amazing wife.
Okay. Well done. Well done.
Thanks.
So I will turn it over to you, Silas. And if do you mind pausing for questions at the end as well?
Yeah,
Is that
I can do
okay?
that.
All right. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And do you want me to unmute? Can people hear me on the?
I will see if
Broadcast?
people can hear on the broadcast. Are people on the broadcast able to hear right now? Yeah, it's on
All right,
camera.
we'll go with it.
Okay.
Stop me if you need me to.
All right.
Pause here, but
Okay.
thanks so much for the introduction. Truly honored to be here and be part of this event and up here with these speakers. You know, I'm also really proud to work for a company that lives by its values and allowed me to find a way to get involved in helping new Americans in some very small way. So as Marie said, I'm the Director of Human Resources for the Northern Plains region of the Home Depot. And in my job, I have the honor of supporting a team of amazing HR professionals that are scattered across 9 states, really kind of across the upper Midwest. And we work together to support around 15,000 associates in the stores in this area, as well as some supply chain organizations and just other locations that we have. I really am here today. I got involved through a partnership with Oscar Rahman and his organization, the American Service in Ukraine. So thanks for being here today as well. They got some publicity in the Star Tribune last fall. And the article that I read just talked about what Oscar is doing to support refugees from the crisis in Ukraine. And I was really excited to help. I feel lucky because I knew right away when I was reading the article that Home Depot would be excited to help too. And so I just sent a message on LinkedIn hoping that Oscar would happen to read it, and he happened to respond. And after we exchanged some emails and a couple cups of coffee, we built a really great partnership where we've been able to hire a number of people that his organization has supported in their transition to the Twin Cities area. And we hope to hire many more through their organization and anybody else that we can help along the way. You know, admittedly, initially, with immigration policy changing so quickly, I was a little bit worried about how we could make the process great for the people who are coming to Minnesota. And that statement in itself, I think, is really kind of key to how we as an organization have tackled the transition. It isn't about the hassle or the administrative kind of hurdles that we have to put in place. We paused and just told ourselves if we're serious about being a values-based company, which is something that we take seriously and really try and live every day, then we need to make sure that it isn't about that hassle. It's about making the process as frictionless as possible for the people that were hired. Obviously, we needed to ensure that everything we were doing was legal. But once we had our arms around that, I worked with a team of amazing people who really look for ways to make our new associates' experience positive for them. So what did we learn in the process? In short, we learned not to take no for an answer. We knew once we realized that it was legal to hire people and that the visas that they were coming to the United States on were made them eligible for work. We knew that we needed a new process for hiring someone who was authorized to work but didn't have a social security number yet. And we approached it from a perspective that it wasn't the new hire's fault that they didn't have a social security number. They were willing to come, they were willing to join our organization's family, and we needed to help them overcome this barrier rather than just telling them to wait until kind of the bureaucracy could catch up. So once we looked at it from that perspective, it really just became a logistical hurdle rather than any kind of debate over whether we would or wouldn't do it. And we were really lucky as an organization. I realized that not everybody has the resources that a company the size of Home Depot has. But for what it's worth, grab me afterward. I'm happy to help anybody that I can. But we had a process in place already that facilitates applicants applying from anywhere in the world that has an internet connection, completing a questionnaire, and being offered a job from wherever they are in the world that's contingent upon them passing a background check and showing that they're eligible for employment once they get to the location where they wanted to resettle. Where we lagged was in the unique situation that many refugees find themselves in, where they're eligible to work the moment their plane touches down in the United States, but they don't have that social security number yet. And I know that that's a hurdle to a lot of employers and, you know, HR professionals aren't exactly sure what to do with the I-9. I'll give you a little bit of background on what we did. I'll tell you, in partnership with my amazing coworkers, we came up with a process where we just leave the social security number blank on the I-9 form. And then the trick, at least for us, was in our payroll systems. We had to put a manual process in place to override our payroll software temporarily and then circle back with our associates to get their social security number and entered into our systems once they get. And it all sounds simple, but it's easy to allow things like this to derail supporting people that just need a small assist. And I again have to give the tip of the cap to our HRIS team in helping make it happen for us at Home Depot. But if we can do it with the bureaucracy that a company our size has, I assure you that any company can also do this. And like I said, reach out to me. I'm happy to at least offer my very limited expertise on this and help out where I can. I'll also tell you that the people that we've hired are simply amazing parts of the team already. You know, Marie asked me to talk about the benefits of hiring new Americans to our workforce. There are obvious benefits of these amazing people doing an amazing job just in the day-to-day and helping us accomplish the goals that we set out for any of our employees. But there's also obvious benefits in adding diversity to our team and the new perspectives that may otherwise never have been dreamed up. These kinds of things improve processes, efficiencies, et cetera. But the benefit that I don't think that I fully realized going into it that I want to focus on today is the one that I least anticipated. The excitement that the rest of our team, the people who have worked for Home Depot for 10, 20, 30 years that are interacting with these new Americans, these new employees, is something just far bigger than I think even, you know, just bigger than our huge company. It's re-energized many of us. To know that we're playing some small part in helping another human being has reminded all of us about what's important in being a leader of people. It's really easy to get over focused on getting the job done, on the tasking, on the day-to-day operations, but everybody wants to get the job done. The fun part of being in leadership, at least in my experience, is the part that can get lost in that day-to-day tasking. And that's about treating people as human beings first and as part of the team second. Our leaders have learned so much about themselves by looking for opportunities to support people in a community that they really didn't know very much about going into it. And like I said, it's truly re-energized many of us and brought just a new kind of overall energy to the workplace where we have started to grow a population of, in this case, Ukrainian refugee community. It's been just amazing. Another great leadership reminder for us has been when we talk about our value of giving back to our communities, it isn't just the community that we can see from our front doors. You know, they say a rising tide lifts all ships, and I have no doubt that what Oscar and his team at American Service in Ukraine is doing is lifting ships across the globe today. We're just lucky to be one of the partners that can help with that. So I'll tell you, if I have one takeaway for anybody who's listening here, it's get involved. Don't take no for an answer. Don't make this more difficult for your applicants than it needs to be. Take the administrative burden onto yourselves instead. Make the hiring process as frictionless as possible from the people who are applying's perspective. Welcome them into your family. Trust that you'll find solutions to these administrative challenges. People deserve support through this transition, and all of us as leaders, HR partners, and members of the Twin Cities and world community will find it well worth the investment in what these groups bring to our teams. Before I turn it back over or open it up to Q&A, I also would be remiss if I didn't put in just a brief plug for Home Depot here. We're absolutely hiring. And I'll tell you, just in the Twin Cities area, we're anticipating hiring about 1,000 people between now and June 1st. We also just this morning, if you jump on the news, we had our earnings call for the quarter and formally announced that we're adding an additional $1 billion into our employee pay. That locally translates to any just starting role starting at an absolute minimum of $16.50 an hour. And we have some of the longest tenure in the retail industry. So once people start, they tend to stay. And last but not least, over 90% of our salaried leaders started as hourly associates. So we started a really competitive pay, and anyone can advance to any level of leadership that they want and truly make a career out of it. I'm truly just proud and blessed to work for a company like Home Depot. I know there's a lot of other great employers out there, and I'm happy to help anybody else hire new Americans into their organization. But like I said, I couldn't resist putting a little plug for a company that I really believe. So I hope this hits on what you were looking for. Again, if anybody ever wants to reach out, there's not a lot of Silas Mayberries on LinkedIn, so don't hesitate to shoot me. I'm more than happy to help any way that I can. Thanks again for having me today.
Thank you. Incredible work. Questions for Silas?
Many of us do background checks and drug testing. I was interested to know if Home Depot does a background check, and if you do, how do you handle that for someone that's just arrived in the US.
Yep, yeah, so we make our offers contingent on passing the background check, and most background checks require a social security number to find the person. And so we have basically a contingent offer that they sign that says, once you get your social security number, we will be completing a background check. What I'll tell you is that you're not going to find anything on a background check for somebody who has a new social security number. So the risk that you're taking on, at least in my experience and perspective, is negligible, because you can run the background check the day that they start, or you can run it 3 weeks down the line, and you're probably more likely to turn something up 3 weeks down the line when they've had time to be in the United States than
So you're
otherwise.
just checking the background in the US and not further from.
Yeah, there's not
It's hard
a
to
lot
do.
of background check agencies that check it's like Interpol or something like that. So yeah.
And can I add to that real quick, through the immigration process, that basically is a very intense background check, it's Department of Homeland
You're already
Security.
done it.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, so if the reason for the background check is to mitigate risk for your organization, it's been mitigated is my 2 cents.
Yeah, we were gonna chime in and say the same thing about the immigration system requiring that in order for admission to the US. So.
Thank you very much for sharing information about Home Depot. My question is, do I understand correctly that Home Depot is willing to offer H-1B visas for those immigrants who would like to apply for positions?
So unfortunately, the H-1B visa, at least in my understanding, and feel free to jump in and correct me, it probably isn't something that's eligible for the types of roles that we typically hire for at Home Depot. Our headquarters is in Atlanta, and there are some roles that we do sponsor people on H-1B visas for. And by all means, we post all of those roles on our career website as well. So anybody in the world can apply for those roles also. The roles here in Minnesota typically tend to be hourly roles in our stores. We do have some leadership roles in our stores that as well, but they wouldn't be H-1B eligible because we don't require a bachelor's degree for any of our leadership positions at Home Depot. But for what it's worth, again, through like the process for Ukrainian refugees, for people that are eligible for some of the humanitarian relief. If you're eligible to work here, we can hire you. But it's more up to individuals, family members, interested community members in the community to fill out. There's an affidavit of support that you can fill out as a individual who wants to support a person coming to the United States. And once that affidavit is completed, again, that's is a key part of the process in getting people to come to the United States. And then people are eligible to work as long as they have the rest of their visa requirements. Sure, I'm not phrasing that correctly, so jump in on anything else that is
It's
necessary.
probably better when a non-immigration lawyer says it, because then you're not using all the terminology. That's good.
They're good questions.
English speaking barriers. Maybe you can help with this as well. What have you found? Do you have translators that they work with, or do you require a certain level of English?
So, it's interesting, when we first started partnering with the American Service and Ukraine organization, that was one of the questions. And we have different types of jobs that have different levels of English proficiency requirements. We have a supply chain facility here in the Twin Cities in Rosemount, Minnesota, where as long as somebody can work safely, if they understand, being around forklifts and understand the words, stop, or understand the ability to train on a forklift, then we're not that concerned with being fully fluent in English. What we've also found is that this is a very motivated group, that their English proficiency is going to exponentially expand over the course of the first few weeks that they're here. And for most of our customers in retail, if we can understand the basics of what they're looking for, and candidly, these smartphones are pretty handy in helping understand if somebody's looking for a hammer in a Home Depot. They learn the word quickly, and also we can translate it quickly with Google Translate or something like that. And generally speaking, we can walk a customer to the product that they're looking for and do 99% of what our customers need, even with pretty limited English proficiency. And then, at least at Home Depot, we offer a lot of different training programs on even things like language. And so we're more than happy to help people expand their English proficiency to eventually take on leadership roles with us.
If I can add an additional comment with regard to language, I know that there are a number of organizations, some of which were mentioned in the presentation, that work with employees, including individuals who have limited English language ability, and actually offer employers training on site. So that is something to consider. for employers who are thinking about hiring new American workforce that may have limited recognition.
And I also throw out there, challenge the status quo a little bit here. These are human beings that deserve it. And, you know, I know that it's easier to lead people who don't speak English, fluent, or who speak English fluently. But again, they're human beings. Let's take care of them. Let's help them find roles. They will add something to your organization, and they're only going to get more fluent in English while they're here.
Okay.
So we had one more slide.
Yes, we do have another slide. So hearing no more questions for Silas, correct? We can move on. All right. So another slide, and then I actually have another added slide. So we've got a couple more. Mhm.
So Marissa and I just wanted to make sure that people have resource information to learn more, whether it is about immigration attorneys or training videos. And Marissa, if there's some that you want to pull out specifically to talk about at all.
I don't think, yeah.
Okay, so this PowerPoint will be made available to people afterwards, so welcome people to take a moment and go through some of these resources in the event of any useful for you. And then I think the last slide, our last slide is our contact information. Please don't hesitate to reach out to us, to our offices, and additional information about the work that we do to be found out.
Fantastic. And building off from the comment that was just made here by Michelle about these, amazing community-based organizations that are out there on a day-to-day basis, helping with connecting employers to resources, to think about what is out there in your community to get more connected, to learn more about what those resources are and how they can assist you in the process. We are going to be opening an employer roundtable on March 8th. That is going to be at the Cedar Riverside Opportunity Center. So I'm going to wave to my colleague, Saeed Bihi, here in the back of the room, and we will be hosting a roundtable discussion, including a couple more examples, real world examples from employers who have worked through the process and the administration and otherwise to bring newly arriving Americans into the workplace. And we're really excited to hear about that. We're also going to be having some of the service providers and organizations in the room with us, just so they can introduce themselves. We'll have a tour of the Cedar Riverside Opportunity Center and start talking about upcoming dates and times for hiring events. I know we will be planning one with Home Depot, at least one, probably many more. It's a lot of jobs open. You may see a few on the calendar, but yes. Another important resource is this Career Force location that we're in right now. And I want you to know that we will be continuing to send out information as those opportunities are coming up to invite you back here for more events and discussion and just more to come. We have a program called Minneapolis Works that we fund in the city of Minneapolis, and that's just another amazing resource with many bilingual staff who can assist, many really creative and great ideas on solving things like transportation issues, thinking about how to bring along coaches that are bilingual, all that kind of thing. So there's much more to come, and this is a pretty wide landscape of available, but we want to bring to the roundtable discussions like those specific resources that are out there in the field to assist you, and then be really planful and intentional about bringing together sometimes to meet candidates. How does that sound? Good? Okay. So I will be doing a follow-up email. In the meantime, any last questions or comments about this session? Any feedback right away? Did people find this information valuable? Did you feel it was a good use of your time? Good. Good. Yes. Okay. So we are now going to jump over to our post recording part of the session where we get to celebrate. Yeah, we have some surprises here. Compliments of Michelle. So just hang on. It's going to be exciting. You want to tell them what today is?
So today's Mardi Gras Day. For people who may not be aware, I'm from New Orleans. So Fat Tuesday is huge. Woo! And I have a couple of Mardi Gras beads. I think pom-poms are almost super cheerleaders and the biggest pom-poms.
All right. Just when I'm excited about things. Excellent, thank you. I appreciate it.
I got a couple more pom-poms and Mardi Gras beads and you're the first to come up.
Yeah, I'll take lunch.
Okay. Exciting. Well, let the networking commence. Coffee, pastries, juice, please stay and have some. And if I haven't said hello to you yet, I'm going to be circulating and would like to talk to you if we haven't met yet. So thank you all for coming today. Much appreciated, and watch for follow-up notes and email from me. Thank you.
Thank you. Constitutional chamber, so.
You don't want to just leave.
So.
Enough about it to-
I guess you just do an end meeting.